Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
When I finally crossed the threshold of my own front door, keys jangling in my hand and a grin stretched so wide it damn near hurt, it felt like stepping into a whole new life. The house smelled like fresh paint and hope, a modest three-bedroom brick place nestled on the quieter side of town, the kind of street where folks still waved from their porches and kids left their bikes lying on the lawns. I had clawed my way to this moment, working two jobs for almost 7 straight years, first waiting tables at a greasy diner off Highway 92, and then grinding out late shifts filing insurance claims until my back screamed. But it was finally mine. No roommates, no landlords, no one telling me to turn the music down or asking when I planned to move out. It was my own little corner of the world, and I intended to savor every damn second. I had barely set down the last moving box when the front door creaked open behind me without so much as a knock. I turned, thinking maybe it was one of the neighbors coming to welcome me, but instead, there stood Becky, my younger sister by 3 years, her blonde hair piled in a messy bun, oversized sunglasses perched cockily on her forehead. She wore that same look she had always worn, the one that said the world owed her something just for existing. Without waiting for so much as a "hey, congrats," she kicked off her sandals, dropped her worn leather bag right onto my brand new couch, and spun around in a slow circle like she was house hunting on some reality TV show. "This room's perfect for me," she announced, running a hand along the living room wall like she was already planning where to hang her tacky velvet paintings. "I'll move in next week." I blinked, half laughing, thinking it had to be some kind of joke. Becky had always been dramatic, always pulling stunts to grab attention, and Lord knows she had a history of dropping into people's lives like an uninvited hurricane. But this? Claiming a room in the house I had just bought? That was a new level even for her. "Very funny," I said, crossing my arms and cocking an eyebrow. "You're hilarious. Now get your bag off my couch." She didn't move. She just grinned, that same wide, empty smile she had used since we were kids when she broke my toys and expected me to just shrug it off. A knot formed in my gut, tightening with every second she stood there, making herself at home. Before I could say anything else, I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. 2 sets of footsteps clomped up the porch stairs. A moment later, the doors swung wider and in waltzed my parents, Mom carrying a tray of lemon bars wrapped in foil like it was still 1985, and Dad hauling a 6-pack of off-brand beer like we were gearing up for a backyard barbecue. I expected congratulations, maybe even a small tearful hug from Mom, who used to say buying a house was the true American dream. Instead, both of them beelined straight to Becky, hugging her like a returning war hero. I stood there, feeling like the afterthought at my own damn celebration. "Sweetheart," Mom said, smoothing Becky's hair back like she was still 12 years old. "This place is perfect for you." Dad clapped her on the back, smiling proudly. "You deserve a fresh start after everything with that no-good ex-husband." "And what about me?" I finally asked, voice tight enough to snap. "I'm the one who bought the house." Mom barely spared me a glance, already unpacking the lemon bars onto my kitchen counter like it belonged to her. "Of course, honey," she said, her voice syrupy enough to make my teeth ache. "But Becky needs this. She's had a hard year." That was it. No discussion, no asking if it was okay with me, no acknowledgement of the thousands of hours I had worked to make this happen. In their eyes, Becky's need trumped my accomplishment without so much as a pause. Just like it always had. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, not a happy one, more like the kind of laugh you hear from a woman who's just realized the house is burning down around her. I swallowed it down, plastered on a smile that probably looked more like a grimace, and nodded. "Sure," I said, my voice light as air. "She can stay. But there's gonna be rules." Becky's eyes lit up, and my parents relaxed like they had just averted some major disaster. They didn't even notice the way my hands clenched into fists at my sides or the slight tremor in my voice. They never noticed. I watched Becky flop down on the couch, kicking her feet up like she was already queen of the damn castle. My castle. Inside, the gears started turning. Fine. She wanted to move in? She wanted to treat my house like a free hotel? Let's play that game. Let's play it all the way to the end. Because I was done being the good daughter, the good sister, the reliable one who always sucked it up and smiled. This time, I was going to make damn sure they all learned a lesson they would never forget. And trust me when I say, it was going to cost a hell of a lot more than a few lemon bars and some cheap beer. Growing up with Becky had been like living with a miniature storm that never ran out of fuel. One minute she was charming everyone into giving her the last piece of pie, and the next she was crying big wet crocodile tears until someone handed her whatever she wanted just to shut her up. Meanwhile, I was the one cleaning up after the messes she left behind, whether it was smoothing things over with angry neighbors after she broke their windows playing baseball too close to their yard, or apologizing to teachers for the forgotten homework she swore she did but never even touched. Our parents had always played favorites, though they would have cut off their own hands before admitting it out loud, and somehow Becky's disasters were spun into learning experiences, while my mistakes were tallied up like I was some disappointing investment they regretted ever making. That bitter little history lesson ran through my mind as I watched Becky, 2 days after she had unofficially moved in, propping her dirty sneakers up on my brand new coffee table like it was an afterthought, scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. I had told her there would be rules, but she either hadn't heard me or just decided, in that classic Becky way, that rules didn't apply to her unless she personally benefited from them. I decided then and there that I would not stop her from hanging herself with the rope she so happily accepted. Instead, I would let her walk right into my trap with a smile on her face. So I started keeping a ledger, a quiet, ruthless little notebook I tucked into my bedside table where I recorded every bottle of wine she drank, every roll of toilet paper she burned through like it was free, every hour she spent blasting her music loud enough to rattle my windows. I tracked utility increases, food she ate, my ruined peace of mind, hell. I even charged her $1 every time she left the front door open and let mosquitoes in, because why not be thorough when you're building the case for someone's eviction? Around the 3rd day of her reign of entitlement, Becky started inviting her friends over like we were back in our parents' basement and not in a house I busted my ass to pay for. They stomped in, loud and laughing, bringing 6-packs of cheap beer and bags of greasy fast food that stained the cushions of my pristine new couch. I stood there in the kitchen, my hands tightening around the counter's edge, listening to Becky call out, "Lisa, you're cool if we crash here tonight, right?" Like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I was some glorified doormat whose only job was to nod along and smile. One night, I found my favorite leather jacket, the one I bought with my first real paycheck, hanging limply over the porch railing, reeking of stale cigarettes and God knows what else. When I confronted Becky about it, she just laughed and waved a hand like I was being dramatic, telling me I never even wore that old thing anyway. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, because if I said what I really wanted to say, we'd be throwing hands right there in the front yard. And because keeping score was the only thing keeping me sane, I jotted down an estimated cost for the jacket, $150. Maybe $160. Actually, hell, let's call it $120 just to be fair, even though 60 plus 40 obviously equals 120. Simple math, right? I didn't even double-check it because who has time for that when you're busy watching your life turn into a bad sitcom? By the end of the first week, my little notebook had grown fat with entries. Becky had burned through 2 weeks' worth of groceries, left wet towels on the bathroom floor so many times the baseboards were starting to swell, and had taken to parking her battered Jeep halfway onto the lawn. Digging ugly ruts into the grass I had paid good money to sod. I told myself it couldn't get worse, but of course with Becky, there was always another level of absurdity waiting just around the corner. It came late one night while we were both sitting on the porch drinking warm beers from a 6-pack she had somehow convinced me to buy. She leaned back, tipped her chair until it balanced dangerously on two legs, and said, all casual like she was asking for extra ketchup, I've been thinking, it's kinda lonely starting over by myself. Maybe I'll have Ryan move in too. You know, just until he gets back on his feet. I stared at her, the beer bottle frozen halfway to my lips, wondering if I had finally, truly lost my mind. Ryan, her flavor-of-the-month boyfriend who had a rap sheet longer than a CVS receipt and thought steady work meant selling junk out of the back of his car, was somehow being floated as a potential new housemate like it was no big deal. The rage I felt in that moment was so white-hot and pure that I probably could have powered the whole damn block if someone had hooked electrodes to me. But I didn't show it. I smiled, tight, forced, a little dead behind the eyes, and said, we'll see, because by then, my plan wasn't just forming, it was nearly complete. Becky thought she was playing the same old game where she took and took and took, and I just stood there clapping like a trained seal. But what she didn't know was that I had rewritten the rules when she wasn't looking, and this time, the scoreboard was about to flip in my favor. And when it did, the crash was going to be loud enough to wake the whole damn town. By the second week, it became crystal clear that Becky had not only decided to make herself at home, but she was also going to act like the entire house had been gifted to her as some divine reward for surviving her last relationship. One afternoon, I came home from a double shift, still wearing my grimy work clothes, my hair pulled back in a frizzy ponytail, and there she was, standing in the middle of the living room surrounded by a whirlwind of chaos. My throw pillows were gone, replaced by bright, ugly ones stitched with slogans like good vibes only and live, laugh, love that made my skin crawl. The framed landscape prints I had saved up to buy, simple, clean, and calming, were stacked face down by the back door, like trash waiting to be hauled out. In their place, Becky had hung 3 enormous black velvet paintings featuring badly drawn wolves howling at moons so garish they looked radioactive. She caught my stunned expression and grinned like a dog who had just rolled in something rotten. Isn't it amazing how a few little touches can make a place feel more alive? She chirped, twirling in the middle of my wrecked living room like she was auditioning for some low-rent AGTV special. Without waiting for a response, she pointed to a pile of boxes shoved into the corner. Oh, and I moved your stuff into the garage. Hope that's cool. There's just not enough room in here for everything, you know? It took every ounce of control I had not to march across the room, grab her by her discount store hair extensions, and personally escort her and her tacky wolf paintings to the curb. Instead, I nodded slowly, feeling something inside me harden and settle, the way mud firms up after the rain stops. I didn't say much, not yet. Words weren't going to fix this. I was playing the long game, and Becky didn't even realize the match had started. A few days later, our parents dropped by unannounced, armed with bags of groceries and smiles wide enough to crack their faces. I watched from the kitchen as they stepped into what used to be my home and immediately started cooing over Becky's amazing taste and bravery for starting her life over. My mother ran her fingers lovingly across one of the velvet paintings, murmuring something about strong spirits, while my father settled onto the couch like he was visiting royalty. Lisa, your sister's been through hell, my mother said in that syrupy, insufferable voice she reserved for moral lectures, the kind she used to deliver to me any time I dared have a feeling that wasn't 100% supportive of Becky. You really should try to be a little more supportive, honey. We're worried about you acting so selfish lately. Selfish. The word hit like a slap, sharp and immediate. Here I was, working my ass off, scraping every penny together to buy this place, sacrificing nights out, vacations, anything remotely resembling a normal 20-something life. And I was selfish because I didn't roll out a goddamn red carpet for Becky and her circus act. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached, smiled sweetly, and told them not to worry, that everything was just peachy. After dinner, while Becky gushed about her latest half-baked plan to start a dog-walking business despite the fact she had never owned a pet in her life, I casually dropped a few words into the conversation that made Becky pause for a half-second. "Moving costs," I said, smiling wider than I had in days, "not to mention upkeep fees. I mean, you wouldn't believe how fast things wear out when there's double the traffic, extra utilities, all that heavy foot traffic." Becky blinked, confused, but then laughed it off like she always did, flipping her hair over her shoulder and brushing away my comments like gnats. "You're so funny, Lisa," she said between bites of Mom's leftover lemon bars, crumbs falling onto the couch she hadn't even paid a cent to sit on. Like I'd ever charge my own family. That's not what family does. I laughed right along with her, a bright and brittle sound that made my parents relax back into their chairs, certain that their responsible daughter was once again swallowing her feelings to keep the peace. Meanwhile, in my mind, I was mentally adding new charges to the running invoice I had been building: depreciation of furniture, emotional distress fees, a surcharge for every damn minute I spent cleaning up after her freeloading ass. Hell, maybe I'd even tack on a courtesy fee just for tolerating the existence of those hideous paintings. Sitting there, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug that Becky had probably cracked when she shoved my dishes into the garage, I felt something unfamiliar bloom inside me. Not rage, not bitterness. Those were old, familiar companions by now. No, this was a cold, surgical clarity, like a scalpel cutting through all the bullshit. Becky thought she was untouchable because she had always been untouchable. But this time, she wasn't dealing with the Lisa who smoothed things over and sucked it up. This time, she was dealing with someone who knew the rules better than she did and who wasn't afraid to enforce them with a damn vengeance. "She's gonna learn today," I muttered under my breath, my smile widening just a little too much, the edges of it sharp enough to draw blood. The best part was, Becky still thought she was winning. She had no idea that she had already walked right into the trap I had been setting piece by piece, and by the time she realized it, it would be too damn late to claw her way out. The breaking point came sooner than even I had predicted, exploding into existence one humid Saturday night when I came home after another exhausting double shift, craving nothing more than a long shower, a cold drink, and about 9 straight hours of sleep uninterrupted by Becky's endless drama. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. The street was lined with unfamiliar cars, headlights glaring into my windows, and the bass from a speaker so massive it probably violated 3 different town ordinances was vibrating through the soles of my shoes before I even stepped out of the car. I stood there for a moment in the driveway, the muggy Tennessee night thick around me, watching through the living room windows as bodies moved and danced, cups sloshing with cheap beer, some idiot already climbing up onto my coffee table. The same table Becky had once dragged across the room without asking, leaving long scratches in its surface I had silently tallied into my mental invoice weeks ago. Laughter rang out, shrill and careless. Someone popped a bottle of champagne that arced sticky foam across the walls I had spent hours painting just months ago, and it took everything in me not to tear through that front door and start throwing people out by their shirt collars. Instead, I turned on my heel, got back into my car, and drove to the 24-hour diner on Route 81, ordering the greasiest plate of bacon and eggs they had and sitting there until the sun started to rise over the sad strip malls and car lots. I wasn't about to give Becky the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. No, I had something much better in mind, and by the time my coffee was cold, my plan was fully formed and waiting. The next morning, while Becky snored away her hangover and the smell of stale beer and body spray seeped out of every open window, I sat at my laptop at the kitchen table, drafting the single most satisfying document of my entire life. I pulled up a professional-looking invoice template, the kind businesses used when they meant business, and began carefully itemizing every single offense, every drop of disrespect, every scuffed floorboard and stained carpet, every late-night party and freeloaded meal she had ever inflicted upon my house. Room rental, I typed, using the current market rate for a furnished room in our town, which was not cheap. Damage to property, coffee table, $200, Carpet cleaning, $350. Repainting walls, $400. Repairs to lawn from illegal parking, $200. Utilities, calculated based on the noticeable spike since her arrival, another $500 tacked on. Cleaning fees, disposal of garbage left from parties, replacement of stolen groceries, depreciation of appliances used without permission. Then, just to put a little flair on the thing, I added a few humorous but pointed charges. Emotional damages due to loss of peaceful enjoyment, $2,000. Therapy fund for future trust issues, $1,000. Inconvenience fee for constant unapproved guests, $1,500. Altogether, when I tallied up the total, after triple-checking my math this time, the grand amount stood at a glorious, breathtaking $24,360.50. I printed 2 copies of the invoice on thick, cream-colored paper and slipped them into crisp manila folders like a lawyer about to deliver the terms of a high-stakes settlement. Then I called my parents and invited them to brunch at my house, emphasizing that I wanted us all to talk about family matters, which was the kind of phrase guaranteed to get them in the door, eager to referee whatever petty squabble they assumed was brewing. Brunch started awkwardly, as brunches tend to do when there are elephants in the room big enough to block out the sun. Becky sat at the table, sunglasses perched on her nose even inside, nursing a mug of black coffee and looking about as remorseful as a cat after knocking over a lamp. Mom brought a basket of store-bought muffins she tried to pass off as homemade, and Dad spent the first 15 minutes complaining about traffic even though we all lived within 20 minutes of each other. I waited until the eggs were half eaten and the awkward small talk had started to dry up before I pulled the 2 folders out from under the table and slid them across the table, one toward Becky, one toward my parents. For a second, nobody moved. Then Becky, chewing lazily on a piece of toast, flipped open her folder. Her fork clattered onto her plate within seconds. "You're kidding," she said, blinking down at the neatly itemized bill, her voice so high it practically squeaked. Dad leaned over, his reading glasses slipping down his nose as he scanned the document. His face darkened, his jaw tightening as he reached the bottom line. "You can't be serious," he said, slamming his fork down hard enough to make Mom jump and scatter crumbs across the table. I leaned back in my chair, lacing my fingers behind my head, and smiled the kind of smile you only smile after waiting a lifetime for someone to finally realize you were not to be messed with. "I'm dead serious," I said, my voice low and calm and absolutely unshakable. For the first time in weeks, maybe in years, Becky had nothing to say, no clever retorts, no fake tears, no half-baked excuses. She just stared at the invoice like it was written in a language she couldn't understand, like it was proof of a reality she had refused to see until it landed right in her spoiled little lap. The silence that fell over the table was deep and thick, broken only by the faint buzzing of a fly that had found its way in through one of the windows Becky never bothered to close properly. And me? I just sat there, sipping my coffee, savoring the taste of what it felt like to finally, truly be in control. For a long moment after I dropped the invoice onto the table, nobody moved, and it was like the entire house had sucked in one long, horrified breath, waiting to see if the ceiling was about to come crashing down. Becky sat there with her mouth open, staring at the number like it was written in ancient Greek, and my parents looked between me and her as if trying to decide which one of us had lost our minds more thoroughly. Finally, my mother, ever the queen of guilt trips and emotional manipulation, cleared her throat and leaned forward, placing her perfectly manicured hand over mine as if we were still back in Sunday school and she was trying to talk me out of confessing something scandalous. "Lisa," she said, her voice dropping into that syrupy, heavy-laden tone she reserved for maximum emotional blackmail, "you cannot possibly expect your own sister to pay this. She's family. Family helps each other, family sacrifices. You should be ashamed of yourself for even thinking about money right now when Becky is at her lowest." Becky, sensing the shift, immediately launched into a dramatic performance that would have made a soap opera star jealous, pushing her chair back so hard it scraped loudly against the floor and burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with big, noisy sobs that I knew damn well were faker than a $3 bill. "How could you do this to me?" she wailed, voice cracking at just the right spots. "After everything I've been through, after everything we've all been through together, you care more about money than your own damn sister?" Dad, who had remained silent thus far except for that one furious fork slam, finally spoke, his face red with the kind of anger that came from losing control, not from any sense of actual righteousness. "If you go through with this," he said, pointing a trembling finger at me like I was some criminal standing trial, "you'll be cutting yourself off from this family. You think a house is worth that?" I sat there and listened to them rant and rave, tears flowing freely from Becky, accusations flying from my parents, and through it all, I stayed exactly where I was, my arms folded across my chest and my face calm and unmoved, the invoice lying like a dead weight between us. When they finally ran out of steam, the room heavy with the bitter stink of resentment and self-righteous fury, I stood up slowly, gathering my folder and calmly tucking it back into my bag. "You have 30 days, I said, my voice so even and cold that it barely sounded like my own, to either pay the balance in full or vacate the premises. If you refuse to do either, I'll be filing a formal eviction notice with the county clerk. And once that happens, there's no more negotiating." Becky let out a strangled sob that might have been convincing if I hadn't already seen her fake it 100 times before, and then she shoved her chair back with a screech and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that one of her tacky velvet wolf paintings rattled off the wall and hit the floor with a dull thud. Dad and Mom stayed behind a few minutes longer, trying one last round of guilt-tripping, trying to make me see reason, trying to paint me as the villain in a story where Becky could never, ever be the bad guy. When it became clear that I wasn't budging, they stood up stiffly, my mother shaking her head in profound disappointment, and Dad muttering something under his breath about how he didn't raise me to be so cold-hearted. I watched them leave without a word, feeling that familiar pang of sadness, that old, worn-out grief of never being the daughter they wanted, but it passed quickly this time, burning itself out before it could root inside me like it used to. Weeks passed after that, slow and tense, and Becky never paid a cent toward what she owed. She didn't even try. Instead, she vanished, leaving behind a mess of cheap furniture, stained clothes, and enough random junk to fill a dumpster twice over. I waited the full 30 days, plus a few more just to be generous, and then I changed the locks, boxed up everything she had left behind, and held a yard sale one bright Saturday morning, selling it all for whatever cash I could scrape together. There was something deliciously ironic about watching people paw through her things, haggling over prices, bargaining down what she once treated like treasures and status symbols to mere pennies. I didn't make much, maybe $300 total, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle, about finally putting an end to the long, bloody history of Becky taking and taking while everyone else smiled through gritted teeth. On the last evening, after the sun dipped low and the streets emptied out and silence finally settled over the house that was truly, finally mine again, I pulled a dusty plastic lawn chair onto the porch, poured myself a heavy-handed glass of cheap gas station wine, and sat there watching the last colors of daylight drain out of the sky. It was a quiet victory, not the triumphant fanfare I had sometimes dreamed about in my angrier moments, but it was real, and it was mine. I thought about family, about how the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally were often the ones who inflicted the deepest wounds, expecting your forgiveness to be automatic, your patience to be infinite. I thought about how much easier it was to make excuses for them than to set boundaries, and how setting those boundaries, real, immovable ones, was seen as an act of betrayal instead of survival. Maybe family isn't who you're born with, I thought, lifting my plastic cup in a silent, bitter toast to nobody but myself. Maybe it's just the people who pay their damn bills. The wind shifted slightly, cool against my face, and I sat there long after the sky went dark, alone but not lonely, wondering if I had done the right thing, or if I had finally become the cold-hearted bitch they always warned me about.